Be seated, please.
I bring you greetings from more than 20 marriages in crisis that we have in a workshop this weekend, once a month. We do a workshop for marriages in crisis, and the number of couples varies by month. There's 21 or 22, I think, couples this month. We begin with them on a Friday morning at 8 a.m. and wind up just before 7 p.m. Then yesterday, Saturday, we again start at 8 a.m. and wind up just about 7 p.m. Today, again, started at 8 a.m. and we'll wind up somewhere around 4:30 this afternoon. So we ask you to pray for them. It's a very exhausting weekend, but it's a God thing kind of weekend. One of the couples there this time, obviously I can't tell you who people are, I wouldn't do that, but this couple actually lives in Beijing, in China. They are Chinese, and I asked them, why would you come to Nashville, Tennessee to work on your marriage? I mean, we're on the other side of the world. And she said, well, I was online looking for articles about our particular marriage problems, and I found some of yours, and some of the ones that I had personally written. I was honored that somebody would read my articles on the other side of the world, but this was the thing that really hit me. She said it was the only thing I found that gave me any hope. And it gave us hope, and so we decided to fly around the world to come spend a weekend with you guys because of the hope. Every once in a while, once every year or so, I will go on the radio with a guy named Dave Ramsey. Some of you may have heard Dave on the radio. He's a good guy. I like Dave quite a bit. And I'll spend at least 1 hour on his radio program with him, and we'll take phone calls and those kinds of things. And during the commercial breaks, he and I will talk. And in one of the conversations that Dave and I were having on one occasion, he said, you know, what my organization offers people is hope, really. Now, the hope he's talking about is hope to be getting out of debt, to overcome all the stresses from financial pressures, a hope that they can have a freedom. So he will say, if you live like nobody else, you'll be able to live like nobody else. And he really does believe that, and he does offer the hope. When it comes to hope for marriage, I'm glad that people would think of us, even in Beijing. When it comes for a hope of getting out of debt, I'm glad to think of Dave and his organization, because Dave's a really good Christian man. But the hope that we have that has to do with our Christianity is the best hope, because it's a hope for what exists beyond what happens on this planet during this lifetime. You understand that various religions have various views as to what happens when you die. There is a major world religion, for example, that believes that you'll be reincarnated, and based on how you live in this life, karma, will determine as to what you come back as in the next life. So you may come back as some very low animal because you've not lived a very good life, or you may come back as a higher form because you've lived a better life, and that you'll just keep repeating and repeating as long as the world stands. There are other people who believe that once you die, it is the end. You cease to exist, that you will never be heard from again in any shape, fashion, or form. That's just it. It's over. Just as you were not, you won't be. And there's actually a tomb. I can't remember where it is now. I remember reading this about it once. And on it said, I was not, I became, I am not, I care not. Our religion is much different than that. We believe that this life is only part of it, that we did not exist before, but that when we came into existence, that our existence will be forever. Not in this body, on this planet, in this way, not coming back again and again and again in various and different forms, but in a different fashion altogether. I'm going to read some passages to you, if I may. The first is going to be from the 16th chapter of the book of Luke. It begins in verse 19. I'm not going to read this entire story. It's a story that you probably have read before. It's called a parable. I'll illustrate the little bit I know about the Koine Greek language. Para means alongside, bolo means a ball or to throw. And so parabol is something you throw alongside. It's an illustration. That's what it means. When Jesus would tell us parables, he would tell stories about things that really happened and use those stories to help people understand things about life. When he tells this parable, this story, we don't look at it as saying, well, this is totally imaginary. It is an illustration, but it's something that, like every other parable he used, it really occurs, but he's making a point with this one. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple. By the way, that's significant if you lived in that particular time, because purple was an expensive dye back in those days, an extremely expensive dye. Therefore, if you could afford clothes that had been dyed purple, it meant that you had money. So when it says he was dressed in purple, it's saying not only did he have money, but he spent it on himself, and fine linen, and lived in luxury every day. Now, you do understand that luxury will vary based on whatever culture that you live in and what's available to you. The next verse says, at his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores. Now, we would call that leprosy. Understand that the word leprosy didn't refer to a specific disease. It was any kind of a skin disease. This man had a skin disease. Under the Old Testament law, anyone who had a skin disease could not associate with other people because of the contagion. As a matter of fact, if you got even close to them, they had to shout out, unclean, unclean, so that you wouldn't come close to them, so that you would not catch what they had. And so there is nobody having anything to do with this man. The next verse says, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Have you ever been hungry? Oh, I don't mean because you missed a meal, or because perhaps you went into some kind of fast, or you just were too busy to eat. I'm talking about really, really hungry. There was a time in my life when I lived pretty badly. Alice and I had divorced. For those visiting, we have since remarried. We've been married to each other twice. She hates it when I introduce her as my second wife. But in those 3 years that we were apart, I lived a very, very bad lifestyle and wound up losing everything that I had ever had, and actually would sometimes go as many as 3 days with no food. None. Oh, I'm sure that people would have fed me if I'd asked, but I was much too proud. I remember a minister who had nothing to do with me tracked me down during a period of time to tell me that they had just had a special collection at his church to build a new church building, and how many millions of dollars they collected to build a new church. There was a time in my life when I would have been really excited about that, but when you've been hungry, I mean really hungry, and no way to eat, it kind of changes your perspective. And I remember thinking, I wonder if I could eat a brick. Longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Nobody wanted to work with this guy. Nobody would give him a job. He's a leper. He's got to disassociate himself from everybody. There's no way for him to exist except by the kindness of others who would throw him something. And he's so hungry, he would eat the scraps. The scraps that typically would be thrown to the dogs. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. They were the only beings in his life that showed him compassion. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. I'm not going to tell more of this story. You've read it before. You could go read it again. It's in the 16th chapter of Luke. I just want you to see something here. It says that when he died, the angels carried him to Abraham's side. You say, what do you mean? Okay. Part of being in ministry is that occasionally you are in the room when someone dies. I have watched several people die in my lifetime. And I have never seen an angel. I have never seen one come and take the body. We know they don't take the body because the body stays here. When you start looking at the way we're made, the way that God created us, we are a body. It is actually part of us. When I was younger, I used to think, well, I'm a spirit who lives in a body, but this body is really not part of me. The more I read my Bible, the more I understand about the Bible is that, no, this really is part of me. It is part of what I am. I'm going to show you that in the Bible in a minute. I am a spirit, but I'm also a body. So I'm a spirit and a body that are melted together. This is part of what I am. Yet this body is made from the elements of the earth, and the only thing that keeps it alive is the spirit that lives in it. So the combination of the spirit and body, that's what gives it life. So James 2:26 would say that when the spirit leaves, the body dies. We understand that. It starts immediately going back to the elements from which it came, because the life force within it is no longer there. I watched many people die. I've never seen an angel take a body. I've never never seen an angel take a soul or a spirit. But I do believe that's what happens, because that's what it says. But they're doing it not visible to the human eye. They're doing it in a very spiritual realm. Many years ago, one gentleman that I watched died. He was an elder in a church that I was with back in the late 1970s when I was still in my 20s, as a matter of fact. He had a terrible disease. It was a long, slow, painful death. It was terrible to watch a man die this way. He had 3 grown daughters and 2 very young daughters, a man after my own heart. The grown daughters got to be able to come up to his room. The younger daughters had to wait downstairs in the hospital, down in the waiting area, because they weren't actually old enough to get up there. And I was up there with the daughters and his wife when he died. They cried. They hugged each other. Even though to some degree they had a sense of relief that he was dead because of all the pain that he'd been suffering, they still loved him so much and didn't want to lose him. They wanted him with them. I understand that, do you not? After a few minutes, all of a sudden it dawned on them. Somebody had to go downstairs and tell the little girls. So they turned to me. I was the minister in the church, and so the daughters said, "You've got to go tell our sisters that our father is dead." I don't know how to do this. I've not been trained in this. I'll go with you and you tell them. No. We'll go with you and you tell them. We got in the elevator and headed down, and I prayed with all of my heart, "Oh, God, give me wisdom. Please give me wisdom." Went over and the girls were playing a little game on a little table down there in the waiting area, and I kneeled down next to them. They were like 7 or 8, as I recall, somewhere in that range. It's been a few years. And so all the way down, I kept praying for the wisdom, and I looked at them and I said, "Have you girls ever seen an angel?" To which they replied, "No, silly. We have not seen an angel. Have you?" No. "Would you like to see an angel?" Then they got to thinking about that, and they kind of decided. They said, "That would be great if we could see an angel. It would be so cool if we saw an angel. Would it make you happy if you saw an angel?" "It would make us very happy if we saw an angel." "Then be happy for your daddy, because he just saw angels a few minutes ago." It took a half second for them to realize what I just said. Then they started to cry. Their older sisters wrapped them up with love. But it was interesting because as they cried, every couple of minutes they would just grin. And I knew what they were thinking. I miss my dad. I want him to be here, but he got to see angels. I got an email from one of those girls this year. She didn't think I'd remember who she was. She said, "I'm the girl you told that my dad just saw the angels." That's what it says. The angels carried him to Abraham's side. I think that there's several reasons that the angels come and get us. One is, I don't think we would know where to go. The other is, I think it'd be a little frightening to die. We've never done that before. I don't know about you, but it always scares me when I'm doing something for the very first time. And so the angels come not just to make sure that we find our place to where we need to go, but the angels come because I think then that would be the most reassuring thing that could possibly happen, is to close your eyes one moment and to open, and the next moment and see these magnificent beings who would say, "Welcome. We're going to take you home." So what does this mean? Let me turn to 1 Corinthians 15, if I may, for a minute. I'm not going to read the whole chapter there, just pieces of it. But in 1 Corinthians 15, the Apostle Paul is writing about this kind of thing. He says, beginning in verse 1, "Now, brothers, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. Otherwise, you believed in vain. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day, according to the Scriptures, By the way, when he says scriptures, he was referring to the Old Testament. This was prophesied. He just told us that was the gospel. He goes on talking about that. And in verse 12, he says, but if it is preached that Christ has been raised from the dead, how can some of you say that there is no resurrection of the dead? Let me put it in context. There were some people who were Christians who said, no, when we die, that's it, it's all over. His whole argument here is, if you really believe that, if you believe there's no resurrection for us, then you must believe there was no resurrection for Jesus. If there was no resurrection for Jesus, then he's not the Son of God. If he's not the Son of God, we're all in trouble. Therefore, if Jesus raised from the dead, we too will be raised from the dead. That's his whole point here. So in verse 20, he says, but Christ has indeed been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. Verse 21, for since death came through a man, meaning Adam, the resurrection of the dead also comes through a man, meaning Jesus. Now look at verse 35. But someone may ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body will they come? How foolish. What you sow does not come to life unless it dies. When you sow, you do not plant the body that will be, but just a seed. Verse 38, but God gives it a body as he has determined, and to each kind of seed he gives its own body. All flesh is not the same. Men have one kind of flesh, animals have another, birds another, and fish another. You say, are we that much different than the other animals? Here's what he's trying to say. Chimpanzees don't produce fish. Fish don't produce chimpanzees. There's a difference here. And he says the body that we get, the one that you look at and you see, is the seed for the next body. You say, what does it mean? You see, my body really is part of who and what I am. It really is. So when it dies, it has to come back eventually. Even if it goes back to the elements from which it came, there's going to be another body, but it's not a whole different body in the sense that it has no connection to this one. It comes from this one. It will have some similarity to this one. Some. But there's going to be a whole lot of differences as well. You say, what do you mean? Well, look at verse 42. So will it be with the resurrection of the dead. The body that is sown is perishable. That's this body. Anybody figured out yet that you're perishable? It is raised imperishable. It is sown in dishonor. What do you mean? It begins to go back to the elements. We don't like to see that. It is raised in glory. It is sown in weakness. It is raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It is raised a spiritual body. We're all going to get it. You say, everybody? Yes. Even the bad people? Yes. Every person who ever existed or exists now or who will exist, once we come into existence, we shall always be in existence. That's what our religion believes. So that when this body, which is perishable, finally dies, and unless Jesus comes first, it will. It may die at age 100. It may die at age 80. The youngest person I buried was 9 days old. It can perish at any point. But another one's going to come. Now, the determination is, where's that one going to live? But look what he says here. Still reading in verse 44, it's sown a natural body, it's raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there's also a spiritual body. So it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam, by the way, is Jesus, a life-giving spirit. The spiritual did not come first, but the natural, and after that the spiritual, meaning Adam came in a body before Jesus came in a body. The first man was of the dust of the earth, the second man from heaven. As was the earthly man, so are those who are of the earth, and as is the man from heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. This is the one I really like. And just as we have borne the likeness of the earthly man. As much as we all look different, we all still look alike. Have you figured this out? I mean, human beings have a distinguishable shape and form. And just as we have borne the likeness of the earthly man, so shall we bear the likeness of the man from heaven. 1 John 3:2 says, we don't know what we'll look like, but we will look like him. You know that when Jesus resurrected, his body was different than the one he had before his resurrection. Do you remember the stories? For example, he could walk through walls. Do you remember that? He could disappear here and appear there. I'm looking forward to a body that can do that. Star Trek, finally. Just disappear here and appear over there and walk through a wall. I just think it would be so cool to be able to walk through a wall. I've tried it. I cannot do it with this body. It's going to be a different body than we have. It's going to be this awesome, awesome body. So in verse 50, I declare to you, brothers, that flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God, nor does the perishable inherit the imperishable. You know what he just said? As much as we want to continue to live in this body doesn't get into heaven. I mean, I want to live a long time. I mean, I'll sing nearer, my God, to thee, but I keep taking that vitamin C. I want to live as long as I can. But here's what he just said. Understand, this body, the one you're in right now, does not go to heaven. The way you get to heaven is to get the new body. And what does that require? Death. Listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep. Now understand that the Bible uses that. As a matter of fact, if you listen to Terry this morning, he used a similar phrase. In America, it's called a euphemism. It's when we use a kinder, gentler word to say something because it doesn't sound as harsh. And so Terry today referred to, you said she passed. That's the way that sometimes we talk about. She passed. She's gone on. She's not here. We use those phrases because they sound so much less harsh than died or dead. People in the Bible did the same kind of thing and would refer to people as being asleep, those who sleep in Jesus. You may have seen that in cemeteries on some tombs, those who sleep in Jesus. That has led some people to believe that when you die, that you actually have no consciousness until the resurrection day, that there's no consciousness at all. Yet, I don't think that's possible because I just read you a story about a man named Lazarus that when he died was taken by the angels to Abraham's side. He was still conscious. Also, you find in the book of Revelation, the saints who had been martyred in heaven are crying out to God, how long, O Lord, before you take vengeance on those people who treated us so badly? They knew, not only were they still in existence, but they knew what was happening on earth, that they had not had vengeance taken yet. As a matter of fact, every time in the Bible when some person who has gone on, who is asleep, when they come back to earth, and that does happen throughout the Bible, various places, various times, every time they did, they knew what was happening here. Remember Moses and Elijah who came on the Mount of Transfiguration to talk to Jesus? It says they came to talk to him about his pending death. In other words, they knew he was about to be crucified. They knew what he was going through. They understood that, and that's what they discussed with him. They knew what was happening on earth. Every reference to a specific person who is no longer living in this body, always, without exception, every time they knew what was happening here on the planet. So what do you think that means? I don't know if they can see or if they've just got a really good newspaper up there. But in some fashion, in some way, the dead, I'm convinced, know what's happening on earth. That makes me happy. I'd like to think that my grandmother knows good things about me. that have transpired since she died. I'd like to think that my dad, who died back in 2002, 10 years ago, this past August, I'd like to think he knows what's going on with my life. It's hope. It means that it doesn't end here. That we leave here, but we continue to exist, we continue to know, we continue to care, we continue to love. And I'll show you one last passage and I'll shut up. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. I'm just going to read it up there, it's easier. Here's what Paul would write later. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death. Again, he's using the word sleep, but I'm convinced it doesn't mean they really are asleep. That's just the euphemism they use so it doesn't sound so harsh. So that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind. Catch this last phrase. Go back one verse, guys. Who have no hope. The people who grieve the most are the people who have no hope. Now the next verse. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again. And so we believe that God will bring with Jesus. You see, they're not asleep. They're not existing. They're with him. God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep with him. They're with him. Look at the next verse. According to the Lord's word, we tell you that we who are still alive, this is going to happen. There's still going to be people living on the planet. The people who are still alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord, will certainly not precede those who've fallen asleep. What that means is that the first honor goes to those who have already died, rather than us who are still alive. Look at the next verse. It says, for the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command. Some translations say with a shout. With the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet call of God. You ever heard about Gabriel's trumpet? I was riding along many years ago, and an associate minister was asleep. We were driving late at night. We went through a town with a train track. The train went by, and the guy cranked down on that horn on that train. He literally jumped up and shouted, Gabriel! No, just a train. Just a train. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Look at the next verse. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. So every once in a while, it's been a while now, I have gone down to Rose Hill, Alabama. That's a little community near where I was born, in a farmhouse, in the living room, because that's where the fireplace was. It was February. No bathroom inside the house. I mean, have you figured out that there's a reason I'm as country as I am? I've gone back to Rose Hill. I have gone to my father's grave. I have gone to my grandmother's grave. I've literally sat next to my grandmother's grave, just alone. There's a whole bunch of pine trees around, and the wind often blows, and you can hear the wind blowing through those pine leaves, and it's so alone. There's that little road there, nobody ever drives on it, and it's like there's nobody else in the world. And I've sat next to her grave and imagined that trumpet, and that the body we buried will come out. But it won't be the frail, sick woman who died. It will be this glorious resurrection body. Beautiful. Never to be sick again. Never to hurt again. Never to die again. And then in my imagination, I see my body change. Me too. And I'll watch her ascend, and she'll say, you can come in a minute. We get to go first. And then I'll float into the air. Now, it's highly unlikely I'm going to be there when that happens. Who knows when the Lord's going to come? I may have been in the grave for a long time since then. And I do know that when I rise, there are certain people I'm going to be looking for. Alice, my daughters, the people I love. There are going to be other people that once I rise to be with Jesus, I'm going to be looking for to say, you didn't think I was going, but I'm here. So it's okay to mourn. It's okay to hurt. But we're looking for something far beyond what we have now. We have hope. So we can miss our sister, or our fathers, or mothers, our sons, our daughters. We can think about them, but we will see them again. And the good news about Kelsey is we know she's a child of God. We know that she was taken to Abraham's side. We know that she's happy. So it's okay. We can hurt. We can miss her. But we will see her again. Now, with that in mind, let's start thinking about the people who don't know Jesus. If we really have this hope, we've got to start sharing it with other people so that they can be there too. Don't you think?
Only hope is you, Jesus. My only hope is you. From early in the morning till late at night, my only hope is you. My only peace, is you. My only peace is you. My only peace, my peace is you, Lord. From early in the morning till late at night, my only peace is you. My only joy is you. My only joy is you. My only joy, yes, my joy is you, Lord. From early in the morning till late at night, my only joy is you. And all that I need, is you. All that I need, Jesus. All that I need is you, Lord. From early in the morning till late at night, all that I need is you. And my only hope is you.